Episode number 96. Welcome to Defen. And we have all the way from Vermont. I don't know exact location. I'm not going to reveal your exact location. So, Gary, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us from all the way, I think, across the pond, as they say. And it'd be nice if you give a quick introduction about yourself, and then we'll dive deep into different topics.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm excited to be on. I've been listening to Defen on and off for a while now, and it was fun catching up on some of your podcasts recently. I was really excited that you guys invited me on to chat a little bit. So my name's Gary Johnson. My handle online is Lambdatronic. On GitHub, GitLab, places, various protocols, networks that I show up on. So as Vijay said, I live off-grid in the deep, dark forest of Vermont, which is in the northeastern United States, bordering with Canada, as well as New York State, for people who aren't as familiar with U.S. geography. So Vermont is the most rural state in the United States. We don't have any real population centers, not really to speak of. Our biggest city has 44,000 people in it. So that's as dense as it gets here. And that's a big college town. It's not even our capital city. I think our capital city has between 7,000 and 8,000 people in it. It's the smallest capital in the U.S. I live in a town of less than 1,000 people, which is not uncommon around here. So there's maybe about 10 like town-ish size cities I could think of in the state of Vermont, where you have some sort of population density higher than a person per mini acres. But much of Vermont is just forested mountains. The state is 80% covered in trees. It has a very outdoorsy, very environmental ethos here. It's a very progressive state. And we're also kind of the state that time forgot in a lot of ways technologically, in that a lot of the state doesn't have cell service or has very spotty cell service. This has a lot to do with our extremely mountainous terrain. So you're always in a cell tower shadow, and our extremely low population density. Because there just aren't a whole lot of people anywhere, it's hard to justify the cost of putting in a cell tower to serve a very small community of a few hundred people. As a result, you get good cell service on our two highways that we have, or in the towns, right? In the bigger towns, and they'll have service. But most of the rest of us live on dirt roads out in the mountains, and the service is spotty or non-existent in a lot of places. So I live off grid, as we said. I have a homestead out here. I own about 70 acres of forest, all extremely hilly and wild. I live in a yurt, which you guys can see on our thing here behind me. I've been in this yurt for almost 10 years now, living off grid here in central Vermont.
How cold does it get, by the way? I'm assuming it's going to be super. I mean, if it's closer to Canada, it's going to be.
It's quite cold, yeah. I mean, typical winter temperatures are not bad at all. I mean, I'm an American, so I think in Fahrenheit, but it's
there are American listeners as well. It's okay.
I apologize for that. So typical winter weather in Vermont is sort of 15 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. So something like 5 to 10 degrees, negative 5 to negative 10 degrees Celsius. That would be your sort of typical weather, nice weather. Really nice weather to be out and about. Temperature can go as low as maybe minus 30 sometimes, but very briefly, which is not too far from minus 30 Celsius as well. So it can get pretty cold. We have a pretty long snowy winter here, about 5 months of snow usually, 7 to 8 month heating season. So it's a cold state. That's for sure.
Were you born in Vermont, Gary? Is that you kind of grew up used to it and all that kind of stuff, or is this something
I didn't know? No, my family is not Los Angeles. My family's from rural Louisiana. Actually.
All right, okay.
So the opposite side of the state, way down in the southern part on the Gulf states. My wife is from Vermont though, so she's been here her whole life, and I've been in Vermont for over 20 years. So I'm very used to it at this point. Vermontized, quite right. I've gone native as best I can. Don't tell the native Vermonters that; they wouldn't appreciate that. And they'd still call me a flatlander. That's what they call people from out of state. So anyway, like I said, low population density, so we don't tend to have a whole lot of built infrastructure, right? Just the tax base is there to support it outside of the towns. So it's a lot of dirt roads and a lot of people living in their own little independent homesteads. Pretty typical thing in Vermont is these little itty bitty towns. Well, the towns are actually large geographic regions in which there's maybe a very, very small village center, and the rest of it's all just forest. And the people are scattered in the woods, and we usually can't see each other's houses. So here's my house. I'm surrounded by a ton of forest. If I go up the road a ways, I can maybe reach a dirt road or driveway that goes to somebody else's house. And if I go down a little further, there's another driveway that goes to someone else's house, and we're all tucked away from each other for the most part. So I see a lot more wildlife than I see humans. On a typical basis, you like sit on your front steps and eat lunch while there's like a deer eating grass in the yard in front of me by my solar panels or something, and a hummingbird flies up to see you. It's like you're in a fairy tale all the time, living in the Shire here. So that's kind of my thing. That's where I live. I power my house with solar power from an array that I built years ago, and with firewood that I harvest off my land with crosscut saws and axes and sleds and a whole lot of muscle power, basically. So all my heat, hot water, and cooking comes from firewood about 7 months out of the year, and then it's solar power for the other 5, taking care of it.
What do you do with other kind of like services? I mean, because it's kind of great to be independent and all that kind of stuff, but aren't there certain things where
do you get your Pringles?
A fair question.
Well, I was thinking more of like more serious things like healthcare and stuff like that. Like, doctors and, if you have a proper kind of,
I do have a doctor.
You cut your finger a little bit while you're hacksawing all that wood off,
It's like,
while you're chopping
off,
Try not to chop the foot off. You got to wear the steel-toed boots, But yes, it can be a little ways to the doctor. We do have we have a good hospital network scattered around Vermont. Okay. Actually, healthcare is invested in pretty well here in the state, but I think like in a lot of places in the U.S., healthcare is can still be expensive and can be difficult to access sometimes.
Right. I mean, you're making it difficult, in fairness. Yeah.
Because there's so few of us, or what? I mean, you just got to drive there.
Yeah,
But I think it's probably easier in the place where you're living to get to the doctor than if you're living in Bombay with the fucking traffic and
there's no traffic here. There's like none, right?
You could zoom.
Yeah. I mean, I'm about,
even if it is like 20 minutes away.
I live like 35 or 40 minutes from the nearest hospital, but there's no traffic between me and there. So you just drive down these country roads till you get there. So it's available, it's accessible, and I live 20-25 minutes away from a town. A small town where I can go get groceries, go to the hardware store, the lawn and garden store, things like that. Things that I might need around here.
What about I know you're drinking water, Gary. So how?
I'm drinking water out of a mason jar.
There's potable water. Oh yeah, even better. Yeah. You're a yurt living hipster.
A hippie, not a hipster, right? But actually, I'm not a hippie though. I'm. We would say that I'm crunchy out here. Actually, not hippie. Like crunchy granola. It's slightly different cultural ethos.
Okay.
So potable water. Yeah, I have a spring on my property that I hand dug, and so that gravity feeds into my stone basement, and I collect the spring water from there and bring it into my house, and I run it through ceramic filters and drink it. So this is gravity fed spring water.
Wow, brilliant! Yeah, very healthy.
Indeed.
But how did you? Before we get into Clojure and technology stuff, so because as you said,
this is a Clojure podcast, right?
Eventually, it's eventually.
Yes. Okay, eventually consistent, and then becomes about Clojure, and then we say, hey, so you are in Clojure, okay, moving on, thank you.
Okay.
No, but I think the interesting part is, as you said, like you don't see your neighbors, and I live in the Netherlands, where basically my neighbors and our couches are shared. We are that close, like super dense area. But how did you end up, coming from the south? I think I'm guessing Indiana is south.
Louisiana, which is is as south as you can get.
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm really bad with U.S. geography. But,
no worries. It's the swamplands with the alligators at the very southern part of the United States on the Gulf of Mexico, right next to Texas. Texas, big state. Okay. People know about that one.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So how did you? What was the journey, and why did you end up in a place where you have your hand building artisanal yurt and
I built this thing twice?
Yeah, exactly. So living by yourself, and what was the motivation? And
Okay, we'll do a little compressed life backstory, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so my family is all from Central Louisiana. My family's Cajun, Cajun French, and for the most part, most of my family members just grew up and just put houses on their parents' land or right next to their parents' houses and live in these communities very closely connected with their families. My immediate family was different, and we were the only ones who were different in this way among all of my relatives, because my father joined the military when he became 18. Right. So before I was born, he joined the U.S. Air Force, and he was in the Air Force for 20 years. And so as a result, we kept getting moved by the military to one Air Force base after another, after another, after another. So I probably moved like every year and a half of my life growing up. So I grew up on Air Force bases, so when people ask me, where are you from? I say, well, I'm sort of from Louisiana, but I don't have the accent. I'm not really from there per se. It's more like I'm from Walmart, something like that. Okay. Because every Air Force base is like every other Air Force base. There are these little gated communities that have like bowling alleys and movie theaters and grocery stores and schools, and like they have everything, housing. It's all inside these gated communities. Yeah, right. So you just I kept getting moved from one to the other in different states, but it's like I wouldn't really sort of absorb the culture of the state I was in, because you rarely leave the gated community in your day-to-day life. So that's why I say it's kind of like growing up in Walmart. It doesn't matter where you are; it's the same. It's the same. So I did that for my entire childhood. My father got out of the military when I was 15. And so then they moved back to Louisiana to be near their family. And I really just couldn't jive with the culture. I went to boarding school, my own request. Went to boarding school for finishing up high school, graduated from there, and went off to college, and ended up heading up north to Vermont pretty soon. And so I went to undergrad in Vermont at a tiny college called Marlborough College out in the mountains in southern Vermont, like everything is. It was 300 students tucked away, down a little bitty itty bitty road, way out in the middle of the woods, right? Just sitting in a clearing in the middle of the forest and learning. And I really fell in love with the place immediately. The people, the landscape, the culture, it was amazing. It was just like being in the Shire out of Lord of the Rings or something. Everybody's a hobbit. So I was like, this is crazy. This is such a cool place I've never been to before. So yeah, I fell in love with the place in undergrad. And I really, as I said, fell in love with the nature of the place in a big way. So I was studying natural history and ecology, wildlife tracking, bird language, all kinds of things like that, while being a computer science student, right? Like that was my focus. But my undergraduate college, being so small, it had a focus on students being able to create their own degree plans. So that was pretty unique. And so I, as a result, I had to create a lot of independent study classes to sort of tie together all my interests in order to ultimately graduate. And you have to do kind of a dissertation type thing, right? But a little bit smaller because it's undergrad, that ties everything together. So I wanted to blend my interest in computers and computer technology with my interest in natural history and biology and so on. So what I did is I ended up diving into mapping landscapes, right? So GIS, Geographic Information Systems, was the natural fit. So I went and got some GPS receivers, learned how they worked. I sat down and wrote some Perl programs, right? Back in the day that spoke to the GPS units over the serial port, pulled the data down, parsed the format, extract it out, get it into a different GIS format that I could then send into a Linux, open source GIS program, generate some maps in an automated way. And I pulled it all together and built a web application backed by this GIS software that I was shelling out to from the server side. And so I built a web mapping application before there were web maps. Way back before anything like Google Maps existed, we weren't doing JavaScript applications in the browser at that time. This was like 2002, 2003, something like that. And so I built this whole field ecology web mapping system for my college because the school had 270 acres of forest and very active, field ecology research that they were doing there. So I built this whole protocol and system for the school to use that was called the Marlborough Lorax. Like after the Dr. Seuss character, right? So lorax.marlboro.edu, and you'd go there. Anybody could log in with their school email address, hit the LDAP server, signed you right in, and you could upload your own maps to the system, and you could see all the maps that everybody else had put up there, including all the base maps I put in. Satellite imagery, flyover aerial imagery, all that kind of stuff in there. And so you could go into this simple interface, and you could click things like, okay, show me some aerial ortho imagery of the campus. Show me a map of the trails of all that. We had a really extensive hiking trail system. Put the trails on there. Then show me where the tracking club has most recently spotted black bear sign or red foxes near the campus. Where are the porcupine dens and so on? And they'd all show up boop, 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 on the map. And you could see, okay, so all I got to do is go up to the school sauna, and I got to go, just this far up to the northwest, and boom, I'll hit a porcupine den. Super cool. So all this stuff was getting mapped out that way. And I was doing this stuff while the rest of the bio students were drawing things on pieces of paper with pencil and things like that, and then taping them up on the wall in the biology building to make like a mosaic of what they thought campus forest looked like. And I was just making digital maps of it, right? Using real satellite data. So that's what I got super excited about. I got really pumped about this exciting way that I could really kind of start to blend together my interest in environmental studies and computers at the same time. And so I graduated with my degree in computer science and geoinformatics. And from there, I went and I worked in it for an open source software company for a little while, writing educational software, but I really wanted to be doing environmental software. So I pivoted away from that, and I went and I took a job in outdoor education for a little while where I wasn't doing any computers, and I was just working with kids, young people, and taking them out in the forest, doing wildlife tracking, wilderness survival skills, all this kind of like low tech stuff with them. And I was having a lot of fun with that. But again, I was annoyed that I wasn't using my computer background. I just needed to get the two together again. So I had a long think on this and ended up going to grad school to get my PhD. So I stayed in Vermont. I went to the University of Vermont, and I got my PhD in computer science again. With my focus area was in ecosystem service modeling. So I was moving from mapping landscapes, which I did in my undergrad, to writing simulation models of what if scenarios on landscapes, right? If I can collect the data, now can I actually write computer programs that'll play out what if scenarios? So that's what I learned to do over the course of my time in my graduate degree, right?
What kind of what if scenarios are you talking about, Gary?
Oh, all kinds of things. Land use change scenarios where you want to look and see, which areas are likely to see expansion for urban growth, right, around population centers. What are areas where we expect to see, wetlands are going to get drained and paved over or something, or an area is going to get reforested or deforested, or this forested area will be turned to agriculture, something like that. And so we look at these sort of changes on the landscape that are either things humans are doing like that, or outside forcing functions like climate change related events, greater droughts, increased temperature swings, stronger storms, things like that. We want to put those kinds of things into these virtual worlds and play out these sort of probabilistic what-if scenarios that are related frequently to assets that humans care about. How is it going to affect them? So, for example, we want to see, what does it look like to see greater prevalence of wildfires? Is something I've been doing a whole lot of in my professional career. I've written simulation software to try to simulate the growth and propagation of wildfires, which is a major problem here in the U.S. and in lots of places in the world. And we have a website called pyrecast.org that tracks all the big active fires in the U.S. and does fire forecasting out to 2 weeks of all these fires. So you can click on them and see hour by hour growth of these fires, their projections updated every few hours, risk maps in the Western U.S.
GPS data, or is it simulation?
It's a combination. So we're pulling in GIS data, the satellite imagery,
GIS,
and we're feeding that into our simulation model. So we're initializing our simulation models with the data we get from the satellites. And then we then predict. Play out these scenarios into the future. It's like a weather forecasting model, but doing it for fire instead, right? And then we put that data back on the website. We show it, we curate it with a nice, easy web maps now, since the tech is so much more advanced than it was 20 years ago when I was doing this kind of thing the first time. So, that's the kind of thing that I do. I mean, but hydrologic modeling as well is mixed in that. sediment retention or loss, deposition, all kinds of things, right? So a lot of natural hazards related modeling, I would say, to human assets is definitely a big concern, and forest change.
Work,
So that's what I did my PhD related work on, right? It was sort of environmental computing, scenario modeling stuff. And one thing that I was frustrated with was as a person who had spent a lot of time in this sort of wilderness skills, primitive skills, survival community, and living out in the forest in these little communities in southern Vermont, when I went to go to grad school at the giant city of Burlington, Vermont, 44,000 people, I was disappointed to see that there seemed to be so little actual environmental action being taken or conservation action being taken by my professors or the other students I was with in my cohort. And I thought,
so they're coming in Dodge Rams and then.
Yeah, you're right. Or just living in like a big suburban house or something. And I'm like, but we spend all our time talking about these environmental issues, but I mean, we're the source of the problem. It's this consumption that's the issue here, and none of us are trying to rein that in. So I wanted to try to see what was possible with today's technology. So that's how I ended up out here, since that was the question you guys were leading to. So when I graduated, I said, okay, let's go put it to the test. I'm in Vermont, which is a great place to be homesteading and whatnot. It's a very rural location anyway. So I said, all right, my dream is to go get a tiny house in the deep, dark forest. That's going to be the plan. And let's see how far I can take this thing. And where do I bump up against real world limits in terms of what is or is not possible right now? So that's how I got into it in the first place. It's also it's a lot more affordable than going and buying a house. House prices are out of control in the U.S. So I bought a yurt. I found a woman who had about 100 acres of land here in central Vermont, and she rented me an acre of raw land. So I would pay her land rent for just use that part of a field. And I built a platform, put up my yurt, solar panels. I put up a wind tower. I installed the satellite dishes, wood stoves, made gardens, the whole thing. And so I lived in this yurt, as I said, with my partner for the last decade. And I'm on my own land now, but I spent 3 years on this other person's land while I was building all these off-grid systems and just seeing, how far can I get trying not to use fossil fuels, basically, at least with my home systems. And so that was eye-opening. I learned a lot about things like biogas or thermoelectric generators, the limits of wind power in certain terrain, solar power, what kinds of batteries work better in different kinds of temperature regimes, and so on and so forth. And so, that's what I did. I built this place up after about 3 years of living on someone else's land in my yurt. I was able to purchase my own piece of land, which is what I'm on now. This is another piece of raw land in the middle of nowhere with no power lines or phone lines coming to it, nothing on the road nearby. But it was great for me because I already had all the systems for living here. So I just, I came over here, I built a stone foundation under my house with stone on the property, moved my yurt here, stood it back up, and moved my sheds over, my solar panels, and so on and so forth. And I had to build new gardens, but that was pretty much it. And so this is where I am now. And I'm very happy with it. But
it is a I think Herculean effort, though. I mean,
so much work, dude. That's not even going to overstate how much work
I would
this has
say
been.
more than Herculean. Herculean to begin with, and Sisyphean.
Exactly.
Imagine Gary as
maybe.
Sisyphus.
Man, I moved a lot of rocks.
Happy,
I moved some huge rocks. I told you this. This is a stone. It's not a concrete foundation. They always pour concrete foundations for houses. This is actually stones. Right. The old timey way of doing it in Vermont were to dig holes in the ground and build stone root cellars. So you find these old ones in the forest when you walk around. There'll just be a pit in the ground with stones lining it. You're like, oh, a house used to be here 100 years ago or something like that. So I built one of those. I actually excavated the one that was on this property and reused its stones and combined them with stones from another stone cellar or stone foundation on this property. And I moved them all over by hand. It was so much work. pushing boulders across the yard with rock bars and just dragging them. I mean, good grief.
You're a real life Sisyphus. Absolutely brilliant.
Meanwhile, we are like, Jim, I'm not going to fucking go to the gym and lift a fake rock. No way. I'm too lazy to do that shit.
I mean, washing up, who can do that?
Oh my gosh. Tell me about it. So yeah, it's been an adventure for sure.
I think it's like a really good example of, your work is not separate from your belief system and your day-to-day life, right? So you're combining them, and I'm just gonna be like maybe a stupid ass comment, so please shoot me down if that is stupid.
Go nuts.
It feels like it's, on an individual level it's pretty easy, right? But scaling these things beyond certain limit, I think that's where the whole bullshit of this massive agriculture and massive, I mean, if we remove all the extravagance, like the unnecessary Netflix shows and all the crap, if you remove that crap, but rest of it is I would say, let's say 50% of the population wouldn't have the skills, and it'll be fairly difficult, right? Or would you think the basics should be pretty easy, or no one needs to lift their yurt and then move it?
I mean, that's a very fair question. It's a very fair question. I think here in the U.S., the kind of lifestyle that my partner and I lead is seen as probably pretty extreme. Maybe less so here in rural Vermont, where I have a bunch of homesteaders all up and down the dirt roads near me, people living in tents and domes and tiny houses and stuff. But broadly speaking, it's pretty off the deep end. And that's totally fair, because it's a relative comparison, right, to the kind of style of Western developed living that's expected in much of America, right, or in Europe, or Australia, or Canada, right? And so there's that. But then again, I've done a fair amount of traveling for work and in my education, and not every country in the world has the same expectance of living standards as we have in Western countries, right? And so I think there are a lot of skills that are kind of lost, let's say, in more developed societies that are still thriving and very strong in more developing countries, or as they might be classified, things like that. Which is to say, there are plenty of very successful and vibrant small towns and villages where people can actually work on their own homes, have their own garden plots and so on and so forth, have a local farmers market, all those kinds of things, right? But at the same time, you're absolutely right that population density is it's just it's a scaling problem. It's ridiculous, right? I can do this here because it's a super low density state, as I said, right? So there's a ton of land. The land is not incredibly expensive, so we can sort of space ourselves out from each other. And I have access to these natural resources then, like a spring that I can dig on my property, open space where I can, on a south-facing hill, where I can set up solar panels or a wind tower, area for me to garden, and so on and so forth. But I don't have a massive sprawling homestead or anything. I keep it pretty compact. I do live in a one-room structure, right? Trying to keep the footprint small. That was the goal here, after all. I think there's a lot that can be done on a lot of levels, but there's no one silver bullet solution.
But I think one of the things we've noticed in, it's true in a lot of environments, is that you could probably have say communal stuff. A great example in the UK is that you can have a communal, a small village could be powered by a wind farm, and that would take them essentially kind of off the grid. People can, like you say, they can invest in solar panels, and that takes a lot of pressure off the grid. I think the worrying thing for me is that it seems like there's always some fucker who wants to use it for some bullshit system like AI or crypto or some other shite, But let's assume that we can hopefully, wake up and smell the coffee sometime and block those kind of bullshit things. Then it does seem like that, like you say, with the modern technology, those kind of technologies can be delivered in a scalable way that can be used by, non kind of
like a locally optimized way.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
even for larger urban environments, not just for the sort of like,
I mean,
very
this
rural
is the thing, right? I mean, because I live in probably the other end of the spectrum. I live in the Netherlands, where I think per person there is it's the inverse of, I don't know, per square centimeter there are 20 people here.
Right.
It's probably the largest in terms of population density, given where you are in the Netherlands. But I mean, we were trying to get because I live in an apartment building, and there had been these discussions about, can we put the solar panels on the top? And
Right.
then there is 20 different types of proposals, like who will get how much percentage of the panel and all these things, and these things take a lot of time, and some people don't want it, and it's always a challenge when you scale it up. But anyway, but
It can be.
I mean, it feels like the playing Age of Empires, and within first two rounds or civilization, it says, oh, your people need more resources, and okay,
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
There are a lot of resources that people can consume pretty quickly. That's very true.
Anyway,
let's
we could think about that all day long.
Now that we have located you,
now that you have located me here in the great state of Vermont, tucked away in the mountains. Yep.
Now, what has been your technology journey? Because you said you're doing computer science, and then PhD and Perl. Obviously, that's one of the, I think, probably the rite of passage for this kind of work.
Back in the early days, sure.
Yeah.
CGI.
So yeah, CGI, Perl.
Oh
and,
my gosh, yes.
Writing all the fun stuff. So how did you start with the programming, and then how did you end up hopefully in Clojure or beyond?
I am in Clojure, yes.
Yeah.
I run a Clojure shop. Yep. I'm thoroughly in Clojure. Okay, how did I get here? Let's do technology then.
It's not an accident that you're on the podcast, Gary. You're definitely in Clojure. We know that.
I am, parens all the way down, man. That's how I roll.
Are you going to rename your yurt to Enclosure and then just...
Oh, I like it. I like it. Yeah. No, it's Lisp on top of Lisp on top of Lisp on my machine.
Exactly.
For sure. We'll get to that. Okay, technology journey. So let's see. I started programming at 15, I think, something like that. Started writing, web pages, simple HTML back in the day, like I think a lot of people did. And then, wanted to learn a little bit beyond that. Putted around with a little bit of JavaScript, but at the time it was the kind of thing that people used to make, sparkles chase a mouse. It wasn't something you'd write applications in, so it wasn't that interesting. The first programming language I really broke into was in high school. I learned Perl. So it was Perl 5 at the time, which is still Perl 5, right?
Still Perl 5,
Perl 6 never happened, right? Okay, Roku, etc. So, I got a book on Perl, and I read that, and I taught it to myself, and I was super excited about it. I was also learning about Linux systems at the time, so I had put that on my computer. I can't remember what distro I put on in the early days, but something. I put some distro on there, and I spent tons of time reading man pages and reading online, all text posts on all kinds of forums and stuff, trying to learn everything I could about history of Linux, free software, open source, the whole thing. So I was really deep in that stuff. So I was learning some shell scripting in Bash, and I was learning Perl, so that I could try to take it a little bit further and start to write some different kinds of applications. And I really went pretty hardcore on the Perl, for about 6 years. I got to admit, I was writing everything from CGI bin type web applications,
poetry.
Perl poetry, absolutely. Obfuscated code. I had the whole obfuscated Perl coding T-shirts.
And then you have the geek code.
Absolutely, I was that guy. So I had these. I was writing, I was writing desktop applications with like WX widgets, and command line programs, of course. And then I was writing right down to things that were, as I said, talking to GPS receivers over the serial port. So anything I could do, I'd find some way to do it in Perl. So that's what I started with, and right after I learned Perl, I started taking classes in school for computer programming as well. So I started with C and C++, and then Java. I think that was pretty much the arc that I was learning in school. Python didn't even appear until I was already in college. And being a Perl programmer, I, of course, was like, get out of here. Well, nothing to do with you. There was a big rivalry there. We did not like that at all. We were like, Python is just Perl in a suit with a haircut. Like, stop. Exactly. Get out of here.
And there is always like a million ways to do the same shit and confuse everybody. So
Precisely.
we want to stick to that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Tim Toady, right? That was
exactly.
That was the thing. There's more than one way to do it. Exactly, in Perl.
Yeah.
And there's only one way to do it was the Python slogan.
Python thing.
And we were like, So I could never get behind Python in the early days. I just would do it all in Perl. So I did all my undergrad work in Perl right up through that Lorax application I said that talked to the GIS tooling. So I was having a great time there. I got out. I worked for an open source company writing Perl software for a little while. And I said at that point, I had really moved into that space of being really excited about geospatial applications. So this is toward the end of, or this is in undergrad and then shortly thereafter. So I was doing mostly Bash, Perl, and SQL for talking to databases. And then after that, so that's when I went to grad school. And so when I went into grad school, at first I was still, of course, gung-ho about my Perl. And I had to program again in like some C++ and a few other things like I had to do for some classwork. And then I took an AI class, which was rather fortuitous at the time. So we used the Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach book by Russell and Norvig. Right? The classic, AMA. And so that entire book is in Common Lisp. And so I had to learn Common Lisp to do the exercises for class, right? Just to learn all the algorithms that we were studying in class. And it turned out that my instructor was actually a bit of a Lispnik, but he was kind of keeping it under wraps. So I was like, all right, man. Now I had bumped into Lisp very briefly in my undergrad, but my professor at the time, I could tell, really didn't understand it and didn't much like it. So he did like one day about Lisp and it was like, you'll never need to look at this again. And then we moved on.
Oh my gosh.
So I see this in grad school and I'm like, okay, round 2. Let's see if we can figure this out. And I struggled with it for a little bit, but then I think like a lot of people, I had that aha moment. I think maybe when I was trying to wrap my mind around structural sharing in cons cell chains, and I was like, explosion, when I got like the macro moment, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. So I was totally in love with Common Lisp by the end of that class. So I just tore through the textbook there. I went to my professor's office. I borrowed a whole bunch of his Lisp books, some other ones by Norvig, Paradigms of Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach. That was another good one. It's in Common Lisp. So I worked those exercises on my own outside of class. I went to the library. I checked out every book they had on Lisp. Went through those things, just really building up my knowledge on it as best I could. Looked into Scheme to try to get a sense of that. And I started an Emacs Lisp, of course. Emacs user. So configuring everything. It's a Clojure podcast,
Yes, of course.
It's going to come up. So I was like, all right.
Ray.
Okay. I know how it goes.
I feel bad.
It's a Big Ten community. Right. So here I was doing my Emacs Lisp, doing a little bit of Scheme, doing a whole lot of Common Lisp, and I'm trying to do my graduate research work. And I'm trying to write these environmental simulation algorithms that I'm coming up with, these new network topology algorithms. And my advisor was working in Java, and he was building this whole new modeling platform. And I needed to write my simulation models to run on his platform. So I was expected to write them as Java modules, as new Java classes for him. Now I could write Java, but I didn't much care for the language. So I really want to do it in Lisp. So what I ended up doing instead, being an unruly grad student, is I would just prototype everything in Common Lisp, get it to work exactly the way I want it to do. And then once I had demonstrated everything and the minimum viable product was working, I would then sit down and port it to Java painfully and then plug it into a system. Now this was never fun because then I had to maintain 2 versions of the software. One was always lagging, was out of sync with the other. It was frustrating. And so I was looking for ways to try to automatically turn the Common Lisp into Java. And so I played around with Armed Bear Common Lisp. Did you guys ever see that thing? The ABCL? It's a Common Lisp compiler that turns Common Lisp into Java bytecode.
Okay.
Right? Not unlike what we're used to in Clojure world, but this is in a pre-Clojure version of Earth. Okay. So I was using Arm Bear Common Lisp. It kind of worked, but there were certain Common Lisp features that wouldn't actually port correctly, especially a lot of third-party libraries. They just wouldn't compile right. And so it was kind of a half-baked solution. So I kept going at it, trying to figure out new stuff. There were some, and then I found a couple of libraries online in some of the Common Lisp sites. There was this one called JFly, and another one called JFoil. And so they were these Common Lisp libraries that were supposed to allow you to kind of bridge across to Java. So you could sort of call Java methods from from Common Lisp, or call some of your Common Lisp functions from Java. They were written by this guy named Rich Hickey, who was a Common Lisp programmer struggling with the Java space as well. And I was like, okay. So I was like trying his libraries out, and I was trying to make it fit. And then all of a sudden, Rich drops the Clojure language, and I was like, what? What? I'm using his libraries right now in Common Lisp, right? So I was there like when it first dropped, and I was like, oh, what is this? What is this? So suddenly I have a Lisp that actually emits Java bytecode correctly and has perfect interop. I was like, oh, it solved the problem. It solved my PhD problem, right? Took all that porting work out of the picture. So it was beautiful. It was the solution I was looking for over a year when Clojure suddenly dropped. So of course I grabbed that thing immediately, hot off the presses, version 1.0, and had to beg my advisor to let me work in it. And he was unconvinced for a bit, but I got him over the finish line, and I just rewrote everything into Clojure. Boom, and it fit in seamlessly with the Java modeling platform he had built. And so I was able to do the rest of my PhD work in Clojure, which was awesome. Wow. Really saved the day. So that's how I ended up finding my way here into this community. And then,
did you tell your professor, look, it's just a library?
I actually took him out to lunch and sat with him and gave him this whole pitch. I kept him there for over an hour, just going at it.
Let me decomplex your brain.
I know, right?
With the word of our Lord and Savior, Rich Hickey.
Yes. He of the glorious curls.
Yes.
That's right. Oh my gosh. So anyway, I after I graduated and having written a whole bunch of stuff in Clojure at that point, I got out and I came to work for the software company I work for now, which is Spatial Informatics Group. This is an environmental think tank based out of California, but all the workers are remote. So most of us are in the U.S. or U.S. time zones, although we have people all over the world.
Actually, I was almost, I was thinking of applying for a job at SIG back in 2023, I think.
Just a year ago.
Because Valentin was working there, I think. I'm not sure
he does work there.
Working there.
He does, yeah. He works with me closely.
Yeah. So I was just talking to him, asking, hey, I see this job posting, but I have zero GIS knowledge. So, and he said it should be okay, but I felt a bit, I can't handle my imposter syndrome, so fuck it, and I'm not gonna apply for this job. So I tracked back.
Well, you would have had a chat with me then, because I'm the director of environmental modeling and software.
Okay. Next time I'll keep an eye.
I would have been interviewing you, VJ.
prepare myself, and then
that's right.
I'm just gonna say, look, man, I tried to build a yurt in the Netherlands.
Got to put a windmill on it, though.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got to be on brand, right?
Yeah. Throw the water away. But yeah.
For sure.
He's wearing clogs right now, by the way.
Yes.
I love it.
I wear clogs, and then I go around and then collect tulips, and
That's fantastic. Clogs are actually quite popular here too.
Oh,
yeah,
for the mud,
yeah, for the mud.
They are practical, yeah.
Indeed.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So this is the group that you founded, or this?
No, I didn't found it. But I was the first software engineer at SIG.
Okay, nice.
So I came to work for them in 2012. Beginning of 2012.
Wow.
So that's when I first came on about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So I was a contractor at the time, and it was a very small company, and it was really focused on, environmental science and natural resource management, right? So SIG is not a software company, or at least it wasn't a software company. I think it's a lot more a software company now, a decade later. But at the time, so Spatial Informatics Group sells actionable decision support information to natural resource managers, right?
Okay.
So that's our deal. So if you manage a chunk of natural resources, a bunch of land, water, etc., air resources, you're a carbon board or something, then you can hire SIG, and we have a bunch of different domain scientists within our company that specialize in everything from forest ecology, carbon sequestration for like carbon credit trading, for example, wildland fire modeling, hydrologic modeling, remote sensing technology, whole broad array of things, right? And so we take in these requests for proposals, these RFPs that come in from the agencies that are managing resources. They're looking for someone to do some kind of scientific R&D for them, some what-if scenarios, to answer some management questions for them. We take them on. Our science teams will get to work on them, applying whatever specific domain techniques make the most sense for that problem. Whatever software makes sense, statistics, et cetera, to try to get the answer packaged up. And then, what we're delivering to our clients are reports, graphs, right? Charts, lots of numbers, tons of maps, because we are a spatial informatics group, all that kind of stuff. And then some kind of confidence bounds on what we think in these different what-if scenarios. Basically, that's sort of generalizing, but that's a lot of what we do. And so when I came on to join the company, my role was to write scientific software that in this environmental domain that would hopefully allow us to produce more reproducible results. So we're not like using this spreadsheet program with a little bit of R tied together to this like MySQL database or whatever, or MS Access database or something like that, to kind of like point and click your way through the analysis. So going to try to streamline, make things more reproducible, better provenance tracking, or faster analyses, write a better model that calculates the same results more quickly than the off-the-shelf things, or calculates new metrics that we don't have access to normally, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the idea. And then I would deliver these to the science teams. They would use those things to provide the same kinds of results. But that pretty quickly evolved into then writing public-facing scientific software, much of which is web applications that we'll write, that are either citizen science data collection applications or websites like Pyrocast, for example, that show off the results of these simulation models that we're running on our compute clusters to the world. So we still do a lot of a mix of that. So we build everything from microservices to web apps and everything in between over at SIG in this environmental space now. But when I first came on, I was the only computer scientist. Everybody in the company had a graduate degree in some environmental field. I was the guy with the PhD in CS, and I was ready to write it all in Clojure, and I did. Right?
So there's no convincing needed to anyone, because it was just you writing the code. Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, I had to convince the managing principal that it would be a good idea to bet on Clojure. But I pitched him on it, and I think we've had a good run so far. So we built a lot of cool software over the years this way, and for a long time it was just me doing the software work with the occasional contractor popping in. And then it was a little bit before the pandemic, maybe 2018-ish or so, that we actually started to hire more software developers. And so now we built that up, and now we have a team of about 20 people of just on the software team. And then, of course, the rest of the company is all the scientists and the business people and so on and so forth. But pretty big growth in the last 5 or 6 years, I would say, from me to about 20. And I mean, my coworkers are great to work with. It's exciting to see all the great ways that we get to apply Clojure, I said, along this whole spectrum of different spaces, command line tools, microservices, web apps, desktop utilities, all kinds of stuff that we get to build. So I have a lot of fun with that. That's I guess the technology journey to here.
So right now the pretty much every project that you have is by default Clojure. And
yes. I mean, we build everything in Clojure that we can. We cannot necessarily build absolutely everything in Clojure. There are certain APIs we interface with that just aren't Clojure. For example, we use Google Earth Engine a fair amount, and that only has a JavaScript and a Python API. But we can bridge across to that in a few different ways. In particular, we leverage libpython CLJ. Right. So that works really nicely in our web apps to let us call out to these Python functions that will speak to this remote API from our Clojure web apps. So that's been pretty successful. There's some wrinkles, some limitations in certain places. You got to be careful what JVM version you use, because it's only implemented for certain, or the memory management routine in different JVMs varies. And so the author of libpython CLJ points out that they don't implement it for every single one, because the release model is sped up to every 6 months as JVM, right?
Yeah,
and so they just can't keep up
every
with
decade. And then
exactly, and now it's every 6
12
months.
weeks, and
you have to go for the
so they only
long-term
support like the
edition.
LTS releases, basically.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah,
exactly. Now there are a few applications that we've inherited from outside organizations, and most of those have come in as Python apps. Some of them we have ported over to Clojure just to make the maintenance easier, and so we can share code among our different web apps more easily. Some of them we have not. We've kept them in Python, but that's a minority. I think there's really just kind of one application right now, one big application that's a Python app. So it has kind of its own stack that's independent. But that was an inherent application. We don't tend to build anything from scratch that's not Clojure, if we can help it. If we can help it, technologically speaking.
And do you have like, I mean, I guess because you're doing most of the work at the beginning, do you have like a preference for a particular set of like, underlying kind of libraries and stacks, and like, are you using like component systems and all these kind of things?
Oh, I use a lot of spec. That's true.
Spec.
Well, so you guys got the backstory. I'm the guy who lives in the woods and cuts the trees down with crosscut saws and drags them out of my own.
You don't need framework. You just need libraries to
thinking framework.
Right. A lot of library. That's our thing, right? So you might guess that I have a preference for doing it myself, right?
Yeah,
if possible. So we, for better or for worse, we've done a lot of building it ourselves at SIG. We definitely use some libraries, but I would say, broadly speaking, because I've been here since like Clojure 1.0, in like a pre-Leiningen world and so on and so forth. I'm really excited about seeing how much I can get done with as little as possible. And also, as a computer scientist, I'm interested in how algorithms work. So I want to know how to implement that particular thing and whatnot. So, for example, when we had to build our microservices tooling in-house, instead of just sort of immediately saying, okay, I'm going to go use AWS Lambda or something like that. I said, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a new bespoke application layer protocol that's going to be like an async communication protocol between different clients and servers of these microservices. I'm going to just write that. So design the protocol, write the thing, hook in the TLS, set up the certificate, exchange systems, and so on and so forth. And so I built something for that and used that in-house. And then built tooling on top of that to coordinate among multiple microservices. So you can kind of evaluate a set of related microservices like a call tree. So there's a dependency network between microservices where you can pass the outputs of some into the inputs of others and so on. Right. So we just kind of built it up piece by piece by piece. Now, is this necessarily the smartest business decision? I don't know.
Yes. Moving on.
Yes. Let's go with that.
Isn't the sort of what do they call this guy? The small talk guy, Alan Kay. Doesn't he always say basically, if you can build your own tools, it's the best way to do it. Build your own tools because you have more control. You get what you want, and in the end, it will just serve your needs better, and it will be lower cost to maintain. Fundamentally, you don't have all these supply chain fuck ups. Blah blah blah. There's definitely a cost of acquisition, even if it's all free.
That's true. On the flip side, if you build it yourself, you also have to maintain it yourself.
Of course,
and you have to fight off bit rot yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you have to extend it every time there's some new feature that you didn't bake into the original minimal concept, and now you need it. So sometimes there are growing pains.
But other people have to do that as well. Then you have to deal with their version of what their update is and what their thoughts are. So.
But would you think Clojure lends it to build stable programs that are less eroded by bit rot? I mean, compared to the other languages, right?
Absolutely.
So that's a slight advantage of using.
There's a massive advantage to using Clojure, right? I mean, look at. Have you guys seen that graph before that shows the adoption of new functions in the source code of Clojure, right? I mean, it's strictly accretive, almost entirely, right? So, which is amazing. It's a huge fight against bit rot, right? We know we can take programs that were written for Clojure 1.0 and you can run them today on Clojure 1.12 RC1, right? It's going to work. And that's amazing that you have such a stable platform to work from. Moreover, not only do we have a super stable platform, but we have a tremendous number of functions, libraries, methods, everything to work from, right? Like when Clojure came out on day one, I thought to myself, good grief, this is a brand new language and it already has more libraries than practically any other language. Because Java had the most, just about. And now it has more than Java. Right? Just one more than Java, Clojure.core, and you got it. Right? So it's a +1 situation. So there's a ton of stuff to work with as it keeps on growing. And I don't have to worry about any cross-platform woes for the most part when I'm working in this space, which has been pretty exciting, for example, when writing software for US government computers. Right, we have a lot of government clients working in this space, and those computers are subject to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of control by the IT staff at government centers, right? So the laptops are issued to the staff. They have specific operating systems on them, specific software. You have administrator access is not allowed. You can't put anything else on there that you want to install on there unless it goes through their whitelisted system and so on. And I understand the rationale behind that, but it does set you up for really narrowing the kinds of technology you can use, right? Like you're not going to just swing in and drop an Electron app on there. So just give up. Don't do that. That's not the approach. So, but when we were given the task of rewriting some rather old Windows-only desktop software that had been written in C++ by a U.S. government lab a few decades ago. So we got this task on our side, and we said, hey, check this out. We're going to rewrite it in Clojure, which, of course, is going to make them go, what?
Yeah.
We said, shh, no, don't worry.
You'll not
Java. We're going to give you a jar file. It's going to be great, right? Like the magic of the Uber jar just sort of erodes a lot of that friction for adoption, even on really lockdown computers, right? Because everybody's got Java. That's 30-plus-year-old technology. The U.S. government is good with that. They're golden with Java. So all we had to do is say, we're going to rewrite it in Java for you. And they were like, oh, great. That'll work. That'll totally work. And now I say, and here's our pitch for not doing C++. Okay, we can now move your Windows-only applications to run on Windows and Mac and Linux and BSD and so on and so forth, right? Look at that. And I know maybe a lot of you aren't using Linux, but you got plenty of Mac users, right? And so you guys, you want to use it too. You can't use that software. You got to use it in a little VM. We can free you from that. So they were sold. And then we came over in here and we wrote this desktop application. We rewrote it as a web app, actually, that would run offline. Right? Using Clojure and ClojureScript. Using Datalog on the back end. And just hooked it all together, packaged it in an Uber jar, and that's it. It's a single file installation. We were able to get that, we can sign those and we can deliver it into these restricted deployment environments. So it's really exciting. I'm stoked about working with Clojure. I think it's been a great business decision for us. Stable platform, large library set to choose from. You can use it to write everything from command line programs quickly with tools like Babashka, right? All the way out to your really nice single language web apps on the other end of the spectrum, where you can easily move code from the front end of the application to the back end and back and forth based on scaling needs. That's always great. Using those CLJC files and so on.
Write once, run anywhere.
Precisely.
It does work these days.
It does, surprisingly. And hey, I mean, you even, despite what you might think, it actually works pretty darn well for writing high-performance simulation software.
Well, we spoke to Alexander, the Clojure Goes Fast guys, a few years ago now, and still use some of his tools. And you can definitely look at the performance of Clojure, and you can get pretty close to and Java close to Java, and Java can get pretty close to C. So eventually you can get pretty close to native performance.
Absolutely. We spent a lot of time doing performance tuning on simulation models over here in Clojure, and you can go a long way if you really work through those algorithms and you're really careful with your primitive math and your arrays and stuff. You can make that stuff just zoom right along.
So Gary, I mean, we kind of like, I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, I watched your talk about Gemini on Space Age on the Clojure, London Clojure, which was really excellent, and it was a marathon session, I think nearly 3 hours. And I was saying, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to talk for, and we've already talked for over an hour and we haven't even got to that yet. So I think we're doing all right,
Yeah, totally.
And your tech is totally holding up as well, by the way, out from the boondocks. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah,
excellent.
So I think we should move into this like this brave new world of Space Age and Gemini, because I feel like this, for me, I was like, wow, this is like super exciting. And taking an old technology and making it fresh again feels like Clojure as well. Took a Lisp and made it fresh.
Right.
Gemini and Space Age feels a bit like that kind of project, and it feels like, oh my god, it was just sitting there, this gopher, and So maybe just I'd let you, because we can talk.
Just
you can talk more.
And
Let's let you run with that and give us a little bit of a kind of brief background on what Gemini is, and I think you're excited about it too. So you've actually doing things with it, so it's even more real for you.
All right, let's do it, guys.
Yeah.
All right, we'll pivot to the subject of today's talk after our 1 hour intro. No worries.
Well, this is like Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? And it has like 10 episodes need to set up to the final end game.
I guarantee you that any of my coworkers who listen to this are going to be like, "Oh yeah, that's just Gary."
Yeah.
Expected. It's going to take him an hour to get to the point. Here we go.
No. I think it's more on us. We're also very curious about a lot of other things. So
and also it's just it's a fascinating story. So yeah. Anyway, yeah.
All right, let's talk about Gemini then, guys.
Yeah.
We'll pivot.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought actually it might be helpful for me to keep myself a little bit more concise by actually jumping over to the FAQ for Gemini Protocol. So the current website for Gemini, for anybody who's out there following along, is geminiprotocol.net. So geminiprotocol.net. That's it. And so you can go there and you can learn about the history of the project, the relevant folks involved. There's a really long FAQ that I think does a good job of answering a lot of questions about the project. So there's lists of software that you can use in the client and server end of things. Space Age is on there, all that kind of good stuff. So it's a good place to start your journey. But let's kind of dive into it. So there's this question: what is Gemini? And so they address this in section 1.1 in the FAQ, and they split it up into two answers: the dense jargony answer for geeks in a hurry, and the gentler answer for everybody else. I figure we have a bunch of geeks on this podcast, so let's just do the dense jargony answer for geeks in a hurry, all right?
Yeah.
So, all right. So Gemini is an application-level client-server internet protocol for the distribution of arbitrary files, with some special consideration for serving a lightweight hypertext format, which facilitates linking between hosted files. So both the protocol and the format are deliberately limited in capabilities and scope, and the protocol is technically conservative, being built on mature, standardized, familiar, off-the-shelf technologies like URIs, MIME media types, and TLS. Simplicity and finite scope are very intentional design decisions, motivated by placing a high priority on user autonomy, user privacy, ease of implementation in diverse computing environments, and defensive non-extensibility. In short, it is something like a radically stripped-down web stack. So that's the dense jargony answer for geeks in a hurry, as it were. So let's be a little more informal then. All right. So Gemini is a lot like browsing the web with links if every website worked completely well in links. Right? If you guys have ever played around with a text web browser before, it's a lot like that experience, like early web days in a pre-JavaScript world, or even a pre-CSS world. Right? That's the kind of thing that you're looking at in Gemini space. So Ray mentioned Gopher, which is one of the big inspirations for Gemini, and that's actually because the creator of Gemini is a hacker who goes by the handle Solderpunk. And so he comes from the Gopher community. He's one of the active members there. And so back in 2019, June of 2019 is when the project launched. So just over 5 years ago. And so Solderpunk was chatting with some of the other residents of the flogosphere, as it were, the Gopher log space, about modernizing Gopher and what some of that might look like, and if there's any value in doing that. And he concluded that it would be a worthwhile project, and so he got to work drafting out this protocol, and then put it out there, and then got feedback from folks within the Gopher community initially. So it's called Gemini, partly because, well, probably in large part because Solarpunk clearly really likes space themes. Okay, and so he was using names for NASA missions. So the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in the United States, so our national space program. So the first, what do you say? The first launch of a capsule into space to orbit the Earth was called the Mercury, or Project Mercury. The second big one was Project Gemini. So the project goes up, and so here, instead of just going up one orbit around and back down again, the idea is you send some people up. They hung out there for a little bit, orbiting the Earth, doing some research, and then came back down. And then the later one was Project Apollo, that was really well known, where the U.S. sent people all the way to the moon. Exactly, right? And so it's kind of like a Goldilocks type story here, like the not too warm, not too cold, just right in the middle. So it was like, so what Solarpunk was trying to shoot for was, he was saying, let's use Mercury. Project Mercury is going to be his analogy or his metaphor for the Gopher protocol, right? Which is a pre-web, for folks who don't know. Gopher was a pre-web protocol for sharing a hyperlinked network of documents, right? It was created, I think, at the University of Minnesota, if I remember right, a few years before Tim Berners-Lee dropped the HTTP protocol on us back in 94, I think is when that came out, right? And so Gopher was originally envisioned as kind of like a step above FTP. So instead of just connecting to a machine where you then have you can just directory browse your way along, and hopefully somebody drops a README file in the occasional directory, so you can read the README or download the README, read the README, and then see what's supposed to be in this folder, and then go back to the FTP client and keep working your way down until you find the file that you need.
I'm old enough to have used that for several years, by the way, professionally.
I still use FTP.
No, Gopher, I mean, Gopher.
Gopher. Oh, right on. That's awesome. Yes, so Gopher was meant to sort of put this a little bit like a slightly higher level, right? So now we can actually see those READMEs in the client, basically. And there will be links inside that document, your Gopher map file, that can then jump around to the files in this directory, or other directories that themselves have their own little sort of Gopher map README type files that show you what's going on in them, all the way down to now you're sort of navigating this file tree, all the way down to your leaves, and then your leaves are going to be like text files or some other media file that you could download and read, right? So Gopher still exists, still a perfectly functioning protocol. It's just not widely used. We all know that HTTP, the World Wide Web, just beat Gopher out in that space. It was a lot more featureful and really took off. And now it's sort of subsumed practically every other application layer protocol, right? Which is what I spent quite a bit of time talking about in that Clojure presentation back in June. So Solarpunk and these folks over in the Gopher community were saying, we love Gopher and all, but it needs a refresh, like you said, Ray, with Lisp needing a refresh into Clojure. So in particular, some things Gopher's missing that Gemini has are encryption. Right? Gopher is unencrypted, just like HTTP. And now HTTPS is much more the norm. Right? We expect encryption in our protocols. So let's get an encrypted version of Gopher. So Gemini is always encrypted. There's no unencrypted version of Gemini. Right? There's a lot of concerns about privacy tracking and so on. So it carries forward that ethos in its design. And also, Gopher maps are not an awesome format to write. So we know a lot about markup languages now. So there was a goal of trying to make a very simple markup language called gemtext, which is what is the native hypertext format that's used in Geminispace, right? So we have this kind of new markup language. We have this encrypted protocol. We have a focus on privacy, simplicity in the headers, and as well as some more important modernization features like supporting UTF-8. So you can write your Gemini page using any language you want.
Emojis.
Exactly. You want to use emojis. You want to use kanji. You want to use TypeScript or whatever, Arabic. You can do these things now, no problem. So that really opens the space for better international adoption and not just being a US thing with just ASCII. So that's great. There's a number of other features and better support for MIME types. That's really missing in Gopher, and on and on. But basically, you can think of it like, because it's Project Gemini, this idea again was Project Mercury is Gopher, the very small minimum viable product. Project Apollo, we're going on the moon, that's the web. It's got everything, absolutely every bell and whistle. And Gemini was the one in the middle that had more than Gopher, less than the web, right? More than Mercury, less than Apollo. So that's the reason for the name, right? Of the Gemini Protocol. So where should I go from here? All right, so he built this thing in 2019. He created the protocol. The first server for it was written by another hacker who goes by Sean Connor. And so he kicked this thing out, and Solderpunk wrote a client. Exactly. So Solderpunk wrote a client to work with it, and boom shakalaka, we had our first client-server pair implementing Gemini back in mid-2019. And from there, the community just started to grow. It had a mailing list that was super active for a number of years. I was on that mailing list. A lot of people were contributing ideas to the protocol. Could we extend it this way? What about this thing? What about this thing? And to their credit, I think the project managers were extraordinarily conservative with what they did and did not accept. You start to learn that pretty quick on the mailing list. There's always going to be some new person that just show up and be like, but it needs this. And you get a big ol' no. And this is why.
The IMG tag.
Yes.
No, Mark Andreessen. Shut up.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
It became like such a meme that at some point somebody put up a Gemini site called like, when will Gemini support?
Okay.
It's like that was the site. Gemini : when will Gemini support? You could go there and it would be like, whatever. When will Gemini support anything? Or like whatever your thing is, and it just said like never. That was the page body. It was great. It's very simple. But they were listening to the community though. So the main things that would really have an impact on the protocol was anytime somebody could point to another, like to an RFC or something, some like actual standing technical document that says like, you know what, you guys missed this, that, or the other aspect of MIME types or URIs or TLS or whatever, something that's supposed to be supported by the protocol. And they say, oh, you're right. We didn't get that right. Let's make ourselves match these canonical technical documents. Those are the things that tended to get accepted. So I want to have this new whiz-bang feature. That was a no. And so this conversation, went on for a few years, and the community built up around it. And we saw lots of spin-off protocols that came out of it, like Titan, Spartan, and so on. We saw the creation of aggregators and search engines, and a blogging protocol. They're called Gemlogs in Geminispace, and so on. So pretty exciting stuff. We have, people finding out ways to show off mathematics in Geminispace, doing artwork, doing like ANSI art and stuff like that. Different ways to do tables and figures and so on. So people figuring things out. I worked out a way to do forms in a protocol that lacks forms, and put examples together of how to do that kind of thing, and so on. I was having a lot of fun with what the server-side programming capabilities are. So I got into things during 2020, during the beginning of the pandemic. Here I was being like, well, I'm not going anywhere on the weekends. I guess I'm going to do something really geeky. So I would hang out on these mailing lists, and I thought pretty early on, I said, this thing is incredibly neat. This is really great because it so easily solves so many of the concerns around just constant advertising, user tracking, privacy concerns, surveillance capitalism that are just ubiquitous in the modern web. It takes it all away in a way that it can't be re-injected into it. So it's really a largely marketing-free space. It's not a target for advertisers, which is, I think, very much what made the World Wide Web into what it is today. What moved it so rapidly from being a network of hyperlinked documents to being the best place to put your business's website up, right? To show off anything and everything. And now these big gated community honeypots that we have in the social media sites. So that's kind of what it's grown into. But this just feels like the old Wild West of the web. People just blogging and sharing hobbyist sites and little games and all kinds of fun stuff, which is, I think, a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, Gary, I mean, maybe it's worth just talking about like again, I think maybe it's the wrong term, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's just like the bloatware of the web. You say it's like this Apollo mission, everything, but I mean, the problem now is that it's like it feels, according to all sources, it's impossible to build a web browser because all web browsers are either Firefox and derivatives or Chrome and derivatives. That's it.
Yeah.
There's only essentially two. Maybe it's Opera, but I mean, that's also
Safari.
WebKit now. So essentially everything is
Safari
like
still WebKit.
It's like Pepsi and Coke.
Is it now? Okay.
Yeah.
It's like Gecko and WebKit. Right. That's what you're doing, pretty much. Yeah, I spoke about that on that Clojure podcast, or not podcast, video conference as well.
Yeah.
You're exactly right there, Ray. So pivoting to the technical elements then, with respect to that. Okay, so what Gemini really brings to the table for folks who like to write software or like to use software that doesn't spy on them is that Gemini is, as we said, a defensively non-extensible protocol. Right? That's what they say in the FAQ. It's incredibly simple, designed with that as a goal in mind, so that a single developer, should they be so motivated, can write their own client or server that 100% supports all features of the protocol in a relatively small amount of time, depending on how much free time you have. Right? I wrote Space Age, which is the first and still only Clojure Gemini server. I wrote that in, I think, a couple of weekends, something like that, right, by myself. Nothing to it. It's an easy protocol. We have people writing it in Go and Rust and Python and Scheme and whatever. There's tons and tons of servers that were quickly cooked up by developers because it's so easy to do. And it's not a partial implementation; it's a full implementation of every feature. And same thing, there are a plethora of Gemini browsers out there with all kinds of different interfaces and features, because again, it's not hard to implement the entire feature set. I think it's a little more work to write a client than a server. That would be my sense of things, just because there's more UI elements you have to deal with. But even still, I mean, it's definitely the kind of thing that you could do inside a month, I would think, of weekends and whatnot, if you were getting after it. So this really democratizes this protocol, right? Because you can know exactly how it works. And if you don't like a way a specific server or client behaves, you don't have to try to find the next plugin or the next ad blocker or whatever. Who cares? Just write your own if you really want to, or get one from someone you trust. There are tons of them out there, and they're all freely available. That's beautiful. Whereas on the flip side, as you said, Ray, with the web, the protocol stack is completely unreachable by a developer or even a small team of developers. It's just not happening in your lifetime. You're never going to write a web browser that can completely implement all of the necessary protocols, right? And I talked about this before, but I mean, you already know what's going on. You have to implement HTTP, sure, but you got to do HTTP like 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, and so on. These are all different. Each one of these has a different set of request and response headers, which are extensive, and most of which are optional. So you got to be able to handle all the optional features that are in there. Right? Every one of these things. You got to handle your cross-origin resource sharing, your CORS requests. You got to handle keep alive requests for keeping the same connection open, for passing multiple documents up and down between the client servers. You got to handle content lengths, cache headers, refers, obviously cookies and super cookies, expiration dates,
what about,
all of these
things.
What
about rendering engine, a JavaScript engine?
Exactly. Exactly. That was just the getting the bytes from here to there part, right? And then once they get there, you got to render. Right. And now you're just dead in the water. Right. And that's where now you have to be able to render all this HTML, but is it HTML like 401? Is it HTML5, XHTML strict, HTML transitional, any of the other versions like before that, or any of the newer things, CSS version 1, 2, 3, and so on. All the JavaScript, like ECMA script versions up through 6, and then plus are,
but even if you just pick the latest versions of all of those protocols and said, I'm just going clean room with the latest everything, I'm not going to support anything in the background.
Huge.
It would still be impossible.
It would take forever because you also have to handle graceful degradation. Like, what do you do when they got the tag wrong or they missed the angle bracket in this place, right? Different web browsers treat bad code in different ways, but they almost always find some way to render it.
Yes.
Right. So, which means you have to do all this tons of defensive code that's going to like analyze and try to bounce back off of errors in rendering and find a new solution to that. How many of those are there that are possible out there? Because really, if you take a step back and look at it, web browsers, right, a web browser is not a client for rendering hyperlinked documents. That's not what it is. It's a VM.
Yeah.
Right. That's what a web browser is. It's a VM that runs source code that you download whenever you click a link.
Yep.
So every time we quote unquote visit a website, we're just downloading the software for that site. We're pulling down all its HTML, its CSS, its fonts, its logos, all reams of JavaScript that's pulling down WebAssembly, whatever else is there, right? You're pulling all the source code down to your computer into a temporary folder. So you're doing an install onto your machine. And you're then running that code in this sandboxed VM. Right, on your machine that has to render and run all that code. That's all. That's what it is. It's a platform for delivering software to your computer at the click of a link, and then running it. And
but how do you control? Because JavaScript was not part of the HTTP or when the application layer protocol was designed, right? These are all like tacked on later for. Can we do this thing? Can we do this thing? Can we do this thing? That's the thing that slowly added up to the stuff. And how do you control it at the protocol level, because protocol is purely innocuous, right? It doesn't know what is flowing through the pipes, basically.
You're talking about Gemini again.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, great question. All right, so that's a really good point that you have there, Vijay. So you're right. In the web, this whole web stack consists of your HTTP protocol for transferring bytes around, SSL TLS for encrypting those bytes in transit, right? And then the whole rendering stack that you have to deal with, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, basically, et cetera, in your browser. And then all the other fun stuff like WebSockets and whatnot that we're doing, right? Web workers and so on. Okay, so you got all those, and you're right. They kind of add on, they accrete piece by piece by piece. Over in, and so much of this is possible, I think, a lot of this is enabled at the HTTP level because of the extensibility of the request and response headers that are available. To support a lot of the stuff that you're going to pass around, you need more features to be supported on the server side that you're talking to, like these keep alive requests, for example, or WebSockets that have to be opened and held open. To keep passing data up and down. So that's just not those things are not in Gemini at all, because one of the defensive features of the protocol is that the request and response headers are one line each.
Oh, okay.
And they're non-extensible. The entire Gemini request is the URL. That's it. There's nothing else. It is if you say Gemini /geminiprotocol.net, that is the request. It's right. An HTTP request is not that. An HTTP request is like it's like get space
something,
the thing
whatever,
space
one,
HTTP / 1.1 next line host : the host next line
headers,
1,000 headers, double blank lines with the /r/n. Right?
Yeah. This is me. This is my dog, and this is where I live, and all the shit that you need to send to the
everything.
browser.
Fingerprint in my browser.
Exactly.
Everything you could possibly want to know about my Facebook super cookies.
Yes.
Right. So you can phone home all that. The only thing your browser, your client sends to a Gemini server is the URL that you're asking for, which means the only information that the servers know about you are your IP address, the resource you requested, and when. They have 3 data points of information. And if you use a VPN or Tor, your IP information is not useful for fingerprinting you. So at that point, it's an anonymous protocol. All they know is somebody is asking for this URL that I know I serve. That's not new information at this time.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, that's so useful. You can certainly use that to track like how many unique IP addresses are visiting my site in a certain amount of time. You could do some stats like that might be useful for you to know for scaling your resources, which is great. But it's not good for user fingerprinting. And that was intentional. Also, as I said, every Gemini request is encrypted, point to point via TLS or SSL or TLS. So nobody's going to see what you were asking for in transit either. So the only information you're sharing, as I said, are those things: my IP address, the resource I asked for, and the time that I asked for it. The The server, when it responds back to you, back to your client, again, is an encrypted response. And the only thing it's sending back is a one-line header and then the body, if there is one, the bytes of the body. The one-line header, when there is a body coming back, is actually just the MIME type. Like that's it. It literally, like every Gemini header is a 2-digit status code. So they do 2 digits instead of 3 like HTTP. So it's a 2-digit status code, a space, and then the MIME type. That's it. So it's like 20 instead of 200. So 20 space MIME type, and then the body.
The bytes. Yeah.
That's it. So your client now knows, what am I supposed to render? It's a misconception. Some people think you can only serve gem text in Geminispace, and that's not true. You can send HTML around if you wanted to. You can send around. You can send around images, video, all kinds of stuff, PDFs, Markdown, whatever. It's for arbitrary files that you would like to share around. But your client, the server is going to say to your client, this is the MIME type I'm about to give you, and here's some bytes. And then it'll signal when it's done sending bytes with a TLS close, or a TLS notify, signal. And then your client breaks the connection and then renders the document. Either renders it or saves it to a file, usually depending on your client.
Yeah.
So your client could support more stuff if it wanted to, and it could support CSS and
it could, but it would, but not really. And here's why. So on top of the response headers being limited to just that absolutely bare minimum information, the other piece of the protocol that's laid out in the spec is that unlike the web, Gemini clients are forbidden from performing cascaded downloads. Right. So on the web, when you click a link, you are
one link can bring another one,
another. Right. You're basically just opening up the floodgates to a whole tree of links. Right. So that's all we know. I click a link and it's going to download a bunch of stuff to my computer, and each of the things that keeps downloading can just keep causing my browser to keep making more and more and more and more requests. You get that HTML page, and now you got to grab the CSS and the fonts and the logos and the JavaScript, of course, and so on. And then all that's going to build up and build up and build up until I have this whole application on my computer in this temporary folder, and then it runs in my web browser VM thing, right? That's really a black box that is only understood maybe by the folks at these giant corporate programming warehouses. And that's pretty much the story. So in Geminispace, when you click a link, every link has to resolve to exactly one resource, and clients are not to cascade downloads. So when you pull something down like a gem text page, even if there are links to it in it that go to other pages, those links are not going to be downloaded on the fly. They're links to another document. If it's a link to an image, it's still not going to pull it down. You have to click the link to trigger the next request, right? So that's kind of baked in. And so as a result, CSS makes no sense, nor does JavaScript, because those are ancillary. You'd have to first get the HTML page and have that render, and then you have to click a link to get the CSS and click a link to get the JavaScript. Those don't even render in the body of HTML normally.
But how do you enforce that on the client, or Gary?
Exactly.
How do we enforce it? Well,
it feels like it's
you're a programmer, so if you really want to do this, you can.
Yeah, exactly. You can.
Right? You could.
It's a sort of honor system.
You can potentially introduce your own format, and then you can build your own quote-unquote browser that's going to do this.
If you want to. It's a democratic protocol. So if you want to write a client that can render HTML, and it'll do so by first making a request to get an HTML link, and if it sees a MIME type of HTML, it will then automatically perform cascaded downloads, which the protocol tells you do not do this, but it does it anyway. Then sure, the Gemini protocol can send you CSS files and can send you JavaScript files, and then you could start rendering them. Of course, you just made that decision to start writing one of these behemoth things that are going to do JavaScript.
Exactly.
So, which you can't do. So now you're going to just go grab WebKit or Gecko, and you're going to write a skin for it, and that's going to be your new browser, right? Okay, go nuts. You made a web browser that supports Gemini. You can do that. So someone could choose to go down that road, but it's kind of defeating the purpose of the protocol in the first place. Right. So what Gemini offers to developers, I think, which is really exciting, is that you can write your own client and server. It's not hard to do. Or you can use someone else's client and server, and you can look at the source code and figure it out pretty quickly, because these are not big, complicated applications at all. So you can trust the tooling that you're using, or build it yourself if you don't trust it, or you want a slightly different feature. So that's really nice that it's in your hands. Second, it's a private protocol, like I already said. Every request and response is encrypted with TLS /SSL. And the only information being shipped around is your IP address, the URL you're asking for, and the time you asked for it, right? And we know that we can obscure, or we can obfuscate our IP addresses if we care enough to.
Yeah.
So that's fine. So it gives us a nice level there of not having to worry about too many privacy breaches. And then you have you can perform authentication.
I guess is
yes.
You're just going to say that.
Right. And then you can authenticate if you want to access private documents, just like you would log into a site with some credentials. You can authenticate to a Gemini capsule, and you can access private documents that are behind some kind of wall, some kind of authentication wall, right? The way you do that in Gemini world is, I think, really interesting and unique with this protocol. And I spent a lot of time talking about that in the that Clojure podcast. But let's see if I can summarize. So here's basically the idea. On the web, whenever you need to access some documents that are behind an authentication authorization wall, you have to log in somehow, right? You're going to use a username and password, or some kind of token to get in. Now, so you send some information in your request to the server. The server takes that information, checks it somehow, like matches the username and password with what's in the database, or whatever. They use their procedure on the back end. If you authenticate, then they can send the response back to you, right? Otherwise, you get redirected somewhere. So, okay, we can send the data back. When the response comes back to you, a cookie is going to be sent along, carrying a session ID inside it usually. And that cookie will be embedded in your browser. And your browser will keep sending that cookie silently
every request
for every single link that you click anywhere on that page, or any of the automatic requests for cascaded files. Okay. And that's good. That keeps you logged in on the site, and it allows the server to hold on to information about who you are and what you're doing right now on the site. They can just keep piling it up in your cookie session. And if they want, they could send more than the session ID. They could stick extra data in that they want to store on your browser, and then they could pull all that back later, even if the session is expired on the remote host, or on the server that you're talking to. So that's cookies. I think the real challenge with cookies is that it's possible for cookies to be used in a cross-site manner, right? And that is that mixed together with referrer headers is what allows sites to do user tracking across sites, right? And then that's what allows it ultimately to percolate up to these big sites like Facebook and whatnot, who can track everywhere you are online, or Google, and figure out where you're at, and then use that to then do targeted advertisement at you. So in the Gemini world, there are no cookies. So that means you can't, and there are obviously no referrer headers. So this kind of cross-site tracking isn't really possible, that was a design decision. But that means you need some other way, lacking cookies, to persist information across a protocol that has no memory, right? Just like HTTP, Gemini is a stateless protocol. Every single request, that's the first time the server's ever seen you. And it's like, oh, hello. What do you want? You want this document. Yeah, exactly. Goldfish memory. So to solve this problem, what the Gemini protocol developers did is they leveraged client certificates in SSL TLS, right? So this is something that's not really used in HTTPS. Just the server certs are. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with like the TLS handshake and the way all that works.
I think in some of the applications that I worked before inside a bank, we used to issue these client certificates for the application basically, and remove the
Right. So I believe it can be done in HTTPS, and I think it's used in some government applications. It sounds like you said in bank applications too. It's just not really a feature that you see in most browsers.
The normal, exactly.
It's not there.
It's not like
Right. So the typical procedure for listeners,
the problem, by the way, Gary, the reason why it's not used very much is like a lot of these things. It's a distribution problem, actually.
Yes. How do you get that one first?
Because SSL v3 basically introduced it. So the problem is, like I say, it's how do you get the certificate in the hands of your user in a way
in the first place?
Secure? That's the fundamental problem.
It's like you need the key to get in, and how do I get the key to you?
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
That's the nice thing about tokens and stuff like this, isn't it? That you can kind of do it out of band, whereas more tricky with certificates.
So Gemini came up with a pretty straightforward way to do it. So the idea is essentially this. So I make a Gemini request from my client to the server, and it's like an HTTPS request or an SSH request, connection to the remote host. In that, I make a TCP/IP connection from my client to my server. I knock on the door there of the host port pair. If there's a server on that port, it opens up the door and says, "What do you want?" And the client says, "Shh, somebody might be listening. I can't tell you what I want. First, we must secure the conversation." And so then they perform the TLS handshake, right? In which they exchange which encryption protocols and algorithms they both know. They pick usually the highest version of the protocol that they both know. For example, TLS 1.3, and a common algorithm like AES or something like that that they both know. And they say, okay, we got our algorithm protocol pair. This is what we're going to use. They exchange a little passphrase, so they make sure the encryption is working. And now they're going to speak through the encrypted tunnel for the next step. So that's step 1 is encryption. Step 2 is the authentication step. So now the server says, all right, great. So nobody can hear us. Now, what resource do you want again? And again, your client says, wait, I can't tell you what I want. I must first ensure that you are you. Like, I don't want to tell a hacker what I'm looking for. So you have to prove to me, Mr. Server, that you are clojureverse.org or something like that. Otherwise, I'm not going to tell you what page I want on your site. And so Clojureverse sends the client its ID card, right? Reaches in its wallet, hands you its ID card, which we call an X.509 certificate or an SSL certificate. Right? So they send this thing. So they send that thing to you. You take the certificate or certificate chain down, and so the browser takes a look at it and has to decide, do I trust this or not? Is it a fake ID or a real ID? Or is it expired or not? Right? And so this is where these protocols differ. SSH, Gemini, and HTTPS all do the same thing basically up to that point. But then how they figure out whether or not they're going to trust that server ID card is different between these protocols. But once they've decided, hey, we agree that you are clojureverse.org, your ID looks legit, then finally the client will say to the server, okay, I want this page on your site. And then the server says, cool, let me get it for you. And they either give it to you if it's publicly accessible, or they say, wait, hold on a second. That's a private page. You can't see that. Like, that's your account page or something. You can't see that. Are you actually Gary Johnson? And now I have to prove that I'm Gary Johnson. So this is where you'd log in, be that login step where, so this would be proved because I would have done a login step first. They would have made a session key. They would have sent it to my browser as a cookie, and my cookie would have been broadcast up with the request. So when I would say, I want this page and here's my cookie, right? Then the browser would go, or the server would say, okay, let's see. Okay, that's a private page. Let me look in your cookie. Yep, you are you. Awesome. Here you go. And they would hand me the page. So use that cookie for authorization on each one of these requests. So that's how it would happen with the web, is with the cookie. In SSH, you made the request. You got to that authorization step. You get the SSL certificate back, and you guys all know this. If you SSH to a server for the first time, you're going to get a message back saying
known host.
Exactly. This is not known. This is a new SSL fingerprint. Do you accept it? You say yes. So that's the how do you decide if it's good or not? It just says, do you accept it? And you say yes. Because what else are you going to do? Otherwise it hangs up. So then it takes.
Well, you deliberately went there. That's the nice thing about it, isn't it? You know you went there.
You know you went there.
So you're prepared to trust it because you tried to go to that exact address that someone gave it to you at some point. So you're kind of trusting the URL, basically, aren't you?
Yeah, precisely. And so then you take that certificate fingerprint, and SSH, your client, will stick it in your known hosts file, right? That's your trust store that's building up. And then you'll make your connection. You're good to go. You then authenticate, right? You can't really access me until you prove that you are Gary Johnson. So I give you my username and password, or my SSH certificate, or my key. Right?
Public key.
Yep, exactly. And then boom, I'm in. So that's the client authorization step. And now I have a connection. I'm good to go. Next time I go to connect to the same server, I won't be asked about the fingerprint, because in the TLS handshake, when the SSH server sends the ID card down to my SSH client, it'll just check it in the known hosts file and say, have I seen that before? Yeah, I have. Oh yeah, there it is. Same IP address, same SSL certificate. It's the same guy. Good to go. And so then it just sends up your key or your username and password, and you're in. Okay, that is that authorization step of trusting the certificate the first time you see the server and storing it at your trust store, and then on every subsequent visit to that site, saying it's still good as long as the certificate they're presenting matches the one you got the first time, is called trust on first use, or TOFU. So that's what SSH uses, is TOFU, which is probably appropriate for the world's greatest vegetarian Clojure podcast, right?
On brand.
Awesome.
It's on brand. Awesome. So, all right. So TOFU is this authorization step that we use in SSH. So Gemini uses that, right? Whereas a web browser uses a trust store that gets installed with your web browser. Like when you put Firefox or Chrome on your computer, you're going to get a directory like etc/SSL certs, and it has a whole bunch of certificate fingerprints or certificate signatures from the certificate authorities.
Change the roots.
Exactly. And so in on the web, when you get this SSH or SSL certificate down, your web browser is going to look at the cert, and it's going to check to make sure that the common name field matches your URL. You know, this is supposed to be clojureverse.org. Yep, the name on the ID is clojureverse.org, not foobar.com. That's good. It checks the expiration date on it to make sure it hasn't expired. Otherwise, you get that, everybody knows that expiration error in the browser. And if it hasn't expired, then it goes and looks at the signature on this thing saying this ID card for clojureverse.org was issued by VeriSign. Right? And so then you go, okay, so your browser goes and checks the trust store, flips through the Rolodex, finds VeriSign's signature, matches. Yep, same signature, good. Otherwise, signatures don't match. This is forged, and it breaks the connection. Same thing, right? So there's this trust store system from certificate authorities that works with the web. And Gemini does what SSH does. So it uses TOFU. So the first time you visit a site, you get the cert, you stick the cert into your local trust store automatically. And every time you visit it in the future, it'll match it. If it's the same, you're good. Anytime the cert changes, your Gemini client will say, hold on, we don't trust this, just like SSH clients do. And you then have to decide if you want to switch the cert out or disconnect and then go through some other channel to determine if the cert is supposed to have been updated. But so that's that. And so, sorry, then using these things, let me close out this piece. So all right, so once we got through that TOFU step, the thing that Gemini does sort of uniquely among these three protocols is the client certificate element, which is more, it's closer to the sending up your SSH public key, right? So the idea is, if I make a request for a private document, your Gemini server can send a response down to your client saying, that's a private document. I need you to give me a certificate first to access it. And give me your client certificate. So give me your ID card showing that you're Gary Johnson. So it just reverses the same thing. And so your browser will then prompt you and say, hey, they're asking for a certificate. Which one do you want to use? Here's your wallet with your local ID cards. Pick one. And you go, I'm going to use that one. And then your browser will send it up to the server. The server can do the authorization check, just like it would check any other token or username password. And if it matches, you're good to go and you have access to this resource. And then once you've done that one time, just like with cookies, your browser will keep sending that certificate silently in the TLS handshake on every subsequent request on that site until you go to a different site. Or say you want to stop sending it, you can send that message to your browser, and that's like logging yourself out.
So this entire protocol thing on the server side thing is already available for Clojure programmers or basically Clojurians who want to use Clojure server using Space Age. So just to round off the discussion on this thing. So what would be the idiomatic application on top of this application protocol?
Absolutely.
Like what would be a simple example of this is how you can use it? Is it going to be a document repository or?
Well, here's what I would say. The sky is the limit. And I've been using it this way at work where we write Clojure web apps, but we also have a Clojure Gemini site on my software team that we use every day in-house. And so the idea is, so we have this always encrypted, extremely simple protocol that can serve documents of arbitrary types, one at a time, right? Well, even though there's no client-side programming language intentionally to keep the stack simple, server-side programming is completely open-ended. You can do anything you want. So anything you would do in a Clojure web server application, you can do in a Gemini web server application. So I wrote Space Age, which is the Clojurians' Gemini server, to support specifically a ring-like programming model on the back end. So whenever somebody makes a request to Space Age, you can write a Clojure script with a main function in it. And if the URL that's being requested in the browser maps to that particular CLJ file under your document root, then Space Age will load it up into a temporary namespace. It will execute your code. It will load it in. It will run your main function, passing it a request map. It's like a ring request map that has all the fields from the Gemini request already parsed out in there for you. And all you have to do is have your main function return a response map with the relevant fields for Gemini responses. So that's it. It's a function of request map to response map. And that will get turned back into a Gemini response, sent back to the browser. Browser will render it, right?
CGI.
Exactly. So
it's CGI programming.
It's mod Perl.
It is mod Perl, man, but without needing to actually set up Apache. So that's all you're doing, right? So you can just write Clojure scripts CGI style, but at that point you can do anything. You can talk to your SQL database or your data log database, make a call out to a third-party provider. You can proxy sites. You know, a lot of people like to make Gemini sites that proxy something else, like the BBC News or something. And so you go hit it, and it just makes a call out, parses the HTML, turns it into gem text, and sends it back ad-free, something like that. So you can do that kind of stuff. I use it at work. So we use Gemini for a team wiki instead of using something like, I don't know, Moodle or Confluence, something like that. Because it's so simple. Basically, I have a private Git repository that the team members have access to. Everybody clones it to their machine. That contains the contents of the wiki, right? Just laid out in gem text and related images or other files, source code files that they would like to have, Eden files, etc. And some Clojure files sprinkled in there, which are little CGI scripts, basically, all sprinkled through the document root tree that we can all write. These are all hosted on Space Age, or using Space Age on a common server. So we have our site, which is devdocs.sigjust.com. And so our team members can just point their Gemini browsers at this site, and boom, they get to see the latest version of what's going on there. The requests that are going to that Gemini server, to Space Age, are actually just rendering the contents of this Git repo, of this separate Git repo that stores the wiki contents, right? And so with nothing more than my little Space Age server and a Git repo containing the actual documents I want to serve, I need nothing else. And that gives me a version controlled database of documents that are right, that we can actually work with in an offline first workflow, that we can edit with our editors of choice, not with markup in a browser. We have to use the browser form fields or text area fields. Peer review is done using Git. Version control is done using Git. There's nothing to it. So you want to add something new to the wiki, you just make the change locally on your machine. You push it up. It gets reviewed by a team member. And when it gets merged, the Jenkins job throws it off to our server, and boom, it's being served up on the site. So it hits all of our goals without needing a whole PHP CMS, a web server, a MySQL database, and all my data lost in binary blobs inside database tables, right? So that's what it's all about.
It's like taking the web back to its roots, as they say. I think it's an amazing. I think it's sometimes improvement is like chopping off of random crap that we don't need.
It can be.
It's one of those things.
I think there's a lot of fun to writing these kinds of things, for sure. And I've written pages that we have a page on our wiki site. Whenever you visit it, it runs a Clojure script that actually polls all of our servers. It's a core async program that checks the status, up, down status of all the servers, and reports back on like 80 or 90 servers in a nice table telling you what's going on. So like immediate server monitoring can be done that way. I wrote a stripped down Jira interface for doing ticket tracking. I could do all clicking the links in Gemini, and it just interfaces via the API to this third-party system, and so on. So I'd say any Clojure programmer who wants to make a simple text-based interface to anything that they're used to playing around with in the web, you can do it, right? That's the story.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Amazing. I mean, to me, it's sort of like you say, privacy first, simple first. It's just like it's super attractive, I think, for I'm so frustrated by so many. You want to write a blog or you want to like do something simple, and it's so frustrating these days because you think, oh God, which of these like
Static
the
rendering.
static
Yeah.
site generators am I going to use?
Yeah, yeah.
Am I going to use a Ruby one or a Go one? And everyone's
Yeah,
I said, for fuck's sake, why is this so hard when it should be
Yeah.
so simple? And
Mhm.
Gemini is just so perfect that because you haven't got that whole magic thing happening between your writing of your document and the serving of it out into the world. So
Right.
I just love that. The
Gemtext
transparency
is
beautiful.
like a stripped down Markdown,
Yeah.
right? And Markdown is completely human readable as is.
Yeah.
So exactly to your point, Ray, you want to write a blog, you write this Markdown looking file with your contents, you FTP it to the server, and that's it. There's nothing else to do. It renders and it looks great.
1995 all over again. Thank you.
I know.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Blast from the past. This has been great.
No, it's great. Honestly,
Anyway.
I mean, we've reached a 2-hour mark, so that's pretty impressive.
We did spend a lot of time talking about yurts and satellites. To be honest,
it's wonderful. I mean, this is such a great conversation.
It's not. I mean, it's not just technology is as you're doing now is intricate or kind of going hand in hand with everything else that we're doing, right? So it's part and parcel of what we're doing these days. It's not like, oh, I'm writing a program somewhere and it has no effect. But these days, everything that we do is affecting practically everybody, and it's nice to know the human side of it and how we're living and how we're making things better. But hey, I think it's probably, I think we've been accused of not releasing enough episodes, but I think this should quench the thirst for people for
if you've stayed this long,
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Thanks to everybody who's listened.
And Gary, thanks a lot for joining. And I'm super fascinated by every aspect of what you're doing with the technical stuff, as well as you're true to the values of living and everything. And I'm gonna walk to a supermarket and then buy Pringles, and then just not like driving 20 kilometers away or whatever, or 20 miles in the US.
Well, at least you can ride your bike everywhere in the Netherlands, which is pretty great.
That's true. That's amazing. Yeah. But hey, thanks a lot for taking the time. And I think people can check this out on geminiprotocol.net and Space Age. Look for it, and also for the deeper dive, looking at the Clojure presentation would be super helpful as well. I'll put some links in the show notes as well. And I think that's it from us for today. And thanks again, Gary. And then I think hopefully one day we'll meet, and then who knows? I'll probably need some tips if I ever want to go off grid in Europe, which is probably away from Europe, I guess.
Maybe I'll catch you on a SIG interview one of these days, Vijay.
Yes, yeah. I'll keep my eye out for the openings, and who knows.
Awesome. Well, it's been great, guys. Thanks so much for the chat.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Take care. Happy hacking.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DefN. And the awesome vegetarian music or the track is Melon Hamburger by Pizzeri. And the show's audio is mixed by Wouter Dullert. I'm pretty sure I butchered his name. Maybe you should insert your own name here, Dullert.
Well,
if you'd like to support us, please do check out our Patreon page, and you can show your appreciation to all the hard work or the lack of hard work that we're doing. And you can also catch up with either Ray, with me, for some unexplainable reason. You want to interact with us, then do check us out on Slack, Clojurian Slack or Clojureverse, or on Zulip, or just at us at DefN Podcast on Twitter. Enjoy your day, and see you in the next episode.
Like,
I have higher and lower speed internet. So I have like 2 satellite dishes that run on different technologies. So I have one that uses low Earth orbit technology, like that's a Starlink dish, and I have another geostationary satellite dish that uses a completely different network. And the geostationary satellite internet is much slower. Because of course you're broadcasting a lot further from Earth, right? For geostationary satellite internet, providers have a lot less satellites. They put them up 22,500 miles above the Earth's surface. At that height, the orbital rotation rate matches that of the rotation rate of the Earth, right? So they're just always sitting in the same place in the sky. They're just static stars. And so you get a fixed dish mounted at your house, right? And it just points at one spot in the sky. The satellite's always there. You're always talking to the same satellite, right? And it has a name and everything. You can see it, on your system console. And so all your traffic is routing, from my yurt through my dish into space, 22,500 miles up, bounces off that satellite, 22,500 miles down, hits a receiver station somewhere on Earth, and from there it gets relayed out over the public internet to whatever site I'm trying to reach or server or whatever. Data gets sent back to the public relay station, bounced back up to the satellite, back down to me and into my yurt, right? So there's 4 passes of 22,500 miles, 2 going out, 2 coming back. So you're 90,000 miles through space added to every single request and response. Every byte, every packet is getting transmitted that extra 90,000 miles at light speed, but it's getting jumped all the same. So you get longer satellite delays, you get more latency in the connection, basically, right? You can still stream video and stuff like that, but you might need to buffer a little more. Anyway, so I had that for years. That was my only way to communicate with the outside world. VoIP phone calls and the whole thing that way. But the great thing about it is that even though it's kind of low speed, it's very, very low power to use those systems. But when Elon Musk brought the Starlink system online, I was in the Better Than Nothing beta program for that. I signed up for it way in advance, and it finally came available here. I got the dish during the beta program, set it up outside, and it's a little robot, that kind of jumps up and spins all around and everything and connects. But it's not a fixed dish, right? It's not even a dish. It's a flat surface with an antenna array inside it. And it's tracking, you guys probably already know this, right? But it's tracking.
I don't know much about it, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Well, so instead of pointing at one satellite all the time, what's going on with Starlink, which is what I'm using to talk to you guys right now, is that you have this sort of flat panel antenna array in the dish head, right? And that's what's sitting outside staring at the sky. Now, it's not tracking one satellite. It's actually tracking a ton of satellites that are moving through the sky continuously, right? Just jumping from horizon to horizon. And that's because instead of using, the problem with the geostationary satellite internet is it takes so damn long to go from Earth all the way out there and back again. So you get slow internet. So the only way to speed it up is to bring the satellites closer to Earth. So that's low Earth orbit or LEO tech. But if you put the satellite close to Earth, it goes too fast. It orbits too fast. So it just shoots through the sky, right? And that's not going to do you any good for having internet. It's gone. And then going all the way around the Earth again. So you got to put lots and lots and lots and lots of them up there. So they make kind of like a belt that's zooming around and around and around you, constantly turning. And so your antenna array is tracking all the satellites it can see in the sky, and it's jumping from one to the next, to the next, to the next. It's leapfrogging between satellites. So this continuous stream of data that we're sending up and down right now is actually being sent in packet streams that are going to one satellite for a little bit, and then suddenly next one, suddenly next one. So I'm actually jumping between different connections. Like I keep switching my internet connection every minute or so, which is just kind of wild.
Fancy router then.
Exactly.